we are, law-abiding American citizens. We pay our taxes. So as Beth as well, let's help the Egyptian cause for democracy by that. But I was overruled. Okay, although I was the president, but I was overruled. They voted against that. They said this is, everyone will tell that this organization is an agent, an American agent. I want you to reflect on that.
Yes.
How many times you saw such thing, and how to deal with it.
No, those are all very good questions. The first one, in terms of me being an Egyptian American, like different organizations have different takes on that. Sometimes organizations don't like to hire people of that country's origin to work on that country's. I personally don't like that because, the whole reason I did international relations is because I want to work on Egypt. That's what I love. I feel I have a connection with that. And I'm a little bit removed to the sense that I'm not partisan. I don't belong to a political. I think if you hire somebody that has a specific political agenda, I think that could be problematic because the whole idea of this kind of work is you do have to be neutral. Like we're not local players.
So neither there nor here was a liability on you?
No, I think there are definitely safety issues. Before the NGO trial, everybody seemed to think that expats are more safe doing this type of work than, because I do have both nationalities. But I think with the NGO trial, the 43 people sentenced were both Americans and Egyptians. So it's but I don't know. But the sense that I got was that people appreciated that I was Egyptian and I wanted to do something for my country. I think sometimes there's a little bit more suspicion when it's not, why do you care? Like that was, my very first time working in Egypt was when I was working at Internews, which did media training. And it's very, Egypt has a very heightened state of paranoia and conspiracy theories. So why are you doing this? What's in your interest for this? And it's like, I want to contribute. Huh? No, this is like the trainees even, the people who come to participate in the program. And it's like, I'm Egyptian, I want to contribute. And sometimes that's not enough for people. They still think that there's some sort of bigger plot there. But I think some people, and once they get to know you, they know. So for me, no, I think it actually, I think it helped. It was a good thing. And I feel like I'm distant enough that I'm not a party to any of the different positions there. Like I'm neutral enough, but at the same time, I have a certain level of connection and understanding with both communities. So that's for the first question. The second question, in terms of the foreign funding stigma, this is really a challenge. It's really a challenge in the Arab world, really. And this was a frustration for me because sometimes I feel like some of the best groups have that sensitivity. And I think when we think about foreign funding, it's a very complex thing for people to understand in that part of the world because there's so much stigma around it. There's so much propaganda in the media around it. The reality is here in the U.S., many of our American civil society organizations are foreign funded. The institute that I work in, our biggest clients have been international clients. It's the nature of the world. It's the nature of business now. People work globally.
Globalization.
There's globalization. So it's, most of my friends who work for NGOs here have worked on foreign funded grants. So it's not limited to U.S. funding. The U.S. NGOs also receive foreign funding. So that's one thing. I think when you think about, as an organization, when you think about your funding sources, you have to be able to justify that to your beneficiaries. So if you can't justify it to your beneficiaries, my advice to you is don't take it. If you could do your work without that funding, or you can find other sources of funding, your primary objective is to serve your beneficiary. So if you receive funding from somebody, for example, if you're doing something for Palestinians and you're receiving Israeli funding, you're not serving your beneficiary, right? So in that sense, it makes sense to be selective about your funding sources. So it was definitely something that we came across. But some of them, for example, in Libya, it was very much an issue because civil society was new there after the revolution. Lots of energy, lots of ideas, and they would tell us, listen, if we're not at zero, we're below zero. We don't want money, but we want technical expertise. Okay, we can help you with that. We can connect you with other organizations. We can nominate you for conferences, for training opportunities. So there's ways around it. It's not just about financial assistance. Sometimes it's just a matter of support, like solidarity, that somebody is listening to you, So I think it's an important question. I think it's some people will not take it, and I think that's fine. So long as you say that this is my beneficiaries or my audience will not accept this, then I don't want it, and I have other sources of funding, that's fine. Or you can say the parameters, I will accept your funding about A, B, C, but I won't accept it on this. And American NGOs have to deal with that as well. Like, I was working at an NGO during the war in Iraq, and they refused to take any contracts for the war in Iraq. I respected their position for that. So these are decisions that you have to make as an organization.
If you pick up a controversial cause, suppose I'm very, very sympathetic, for instance, the people who lost their eyes in Tahrir. And I went to Egypt and tried to help them. Suppose I go and you are back in NED and I said I want $20,000 because I'm going to go and help them. That's a very controversial and sensitive thing, because it raises the question, who did shoot these people, and I mean, are there sensitive issues the US funder?
They won't get involved in like partisan or political issues. I wouldn't say that that's a controversial issue, but I would say it's potentially outside of the scope, because it depends on how you're going to help them. If you're providing medical assistance, that would be outside of the scope of NED, but maybe USAID would fund it, So you have to, if you're seeking funding, you have to identify the mission of that organization, and you have to appeal to the organization that has. And this is, again, if you're an organization, the number one thing for you to do is define your mission. This is who I am, this is my priority, and this is what I do. If you're doing it backwards, if you're saying, I'm going to get money from this organization, then you're doing nothing. That's not how you finance an organization. It's not running after the funding. It's identifying your mission and figuring out who supports that mission.
Like, rehabilitation of someone.
So rehabilitation, that wasn't something that NED supported. NED supported more things like, if, again, like I mentioned, like the monitoring of public budget, doing policy research, independent policy research, training journalists. Like, it was more that. They don't do humanitarian, For something like that, there's a number of organizations. I would say I would talk to Physicians Without Borders. That would be the first group that I would go to. And then maybe USAID. And these are some things like that. I feel like that is where you have to also identify where are the areas where I can get local funding and where do I need international funding. We know in Egypt there's a lot of funding that goes to religious groups. There's the people themselves, even in a very poor society, people will donate to religious groups. So if it's religious oriented charities, there's a lot of local sources of funding for that. There's also groups that there's a lot of funding for development work, and organizations that have had a long history doing development work in Egypt. There's less support for civic activities. There's less support for like voter education. There needs to be local financing for that, but there's less because people haven't understood the value of that.
Monitoring elections, wouldn't that be?
Yeah, monitoring elections. NED does some support to monitoring elections, although for Egypt, because there were so many other groups that did monitoring elections, they didn't. Because again, NED is a very small funder, so they always see, where are their holes. So who's supporting what in Egypt, and we're going to take, because it's very small, so they would take, whatever's not covered by other donors. So monitoring elections, USAID supported in a very, very big way. So NED tended not to have too many. I think they supported one or two programs that was more on voter education than election monitoring per se.
The word democracy in NED implies or requires a proactive approach to democratic institutions and programs all over the world. I mean, don't wait or avoid democracy. Mm-hmm. I mean, for 30 years, Mubarak ruled Egypt and NED was silent. Why doesn't NED support, actively, proactively support change toward democracy?
Because that's not the kind of organization that it is. I mean, again, they support in a different way.
I mean, leave out the word democracy, NE for something else.
Yeah.
Leave out the word democracy.
I mean, again, that would be a question to have with the people who design the mission of the organization. And again, I don't represent it. I don't work there anymore. But again,
congressman who is funding it.
No, but again, and honestly, this is advice also to Egyptian organizations, because this is the mistake that Egyptian organizations make. You take on more than you can chew. Do not do that. That doesn't make sense. From an economic perspective, you focus on where you have a comparative advantage. NED has a very specific focus. It has a very specific mission. It does, it's a grant-making organization that supports civil society organizations. That's what it does. There are
Regardless of the
dozens.